Hello, Western Civilization 105 class. Um, this is going to be my intro into the Israel-Palestine conflict. Now, um, many people have strong opinions about this. I'm aware of that. Um, and there's going to be many people that are going to wonder why I am highlighting this at the end of my Western Civilization class. I'm going to my whole presentation that I give here will help explain that context. The videos that I'm going to show, the documentary clips afterwards, is going to follow in a jarring way if you don't pay attention very closely to this mini lecture that I'm giving, because I'm trying to fill in some of the gaps so that we can just get you quickly to understand how we got to this place, why I'm even having this discussion, and something about the history in better detail. Keep in mind that this section of my Western Civ class, I do change quite often based on the fact that I'm dealing with contemporary Western history up to a certain point, and I think it's important to take whatever topic I think is standing out the most in relation to Western civilization and the history that we've covered, okay? So up until recently, I've focused mainly on Russia and Ukraine. It is still a very important topic. It is still a current terrible tragedy still taking place. But at this point, there's also a lot of information out there as well. I do have a clip that I'm showing you of the background of that, and that should be helpful. There are so many other conflicts in the world that are highly, highly important. Sudan, Congo, what's happening right now in Thailand, in Cambodia, and on the border there, which is actually affecting people that I know and my own cousin's in-laws. So there's no shortage of these terrible conflicts in the world, but I'm focusing on the one that I think is directly related to the topic of the West. And so I'm going to move on to this now, but I also want to clarify some things that we can, as I start off, because of the sensitivity of the topic for many people, and the fact that I'm going to appear to have my own very strong bias, which I'm going to make a case for in just a moment. First of all, the intent of my lecture and my presentation is not to demonize anyone on a collective level. As we see with wars and conflicts, right? People tend to feel that for some reason it's like, okay, so we're attacking or we're upset with a particular regime, a political ideology, something that takes place, and now we're making a collective critique of that particular group of people. This is absolutely against what I'm trying to articulate here. So, for example, in World War II, when we make harsh critiques of the way Germany behaved, the way Italy behaved, or the French government under General Pétain and that collaborated with the Nazis, when we critique the way that Japan behaved towards people in its sphere, or we even critique what the United States has done, are we saying that there's something inherently wrong with German people, Italians, French, Japanese, Americans, right? So let's just remove that from that. And I have to say that because the Israel-Palestine conflict gets really convoluted with the idea of what does this mean about how you feel about Jewish people or Arabs? And that is actually something that I'm trying to break away from this, but ultimately I do have a strong bias based on the history that I'm aware of and the information of things taking place now. That is going to make a critique of a government, one particular government, and some of the ideologies that are creating a situation that I think is a important enough for me to prioritize at the end of the semester. So, having said that, um, what the Israel-Palestine conflict is probably the most misunderstood, and there's a reason. And it's also, if you, from a historical point of view, I can understand how confusing it can get. If you grow up Christian or Jewish, and you are regularly attending synagogue services and the church services, the idea that Jewish people and the Holy Land go together and have always gone together, and that this is something that should always be, and it's always been, it's a very natural thing, because the Bible itself, the way it's articulated for those of my students who are not familiar with the Bible, is based on an idea that God has a covenant with the Jewish people, and that it's also directly related to the particular land in that area, with Jerusalem as the center. Now, what ended up happening historically is, in the first century, the Romans were the occupiers. They were dominating the force there, right after the Greeks did. And the people of that land, which were a majority Jewish people at the time, they resisted the Roman occupation, and Rome destroyed the temple. And that became a huge impact on the Jewish people. Then there was one more man, decades later, who came and said that he is the Messiah. Now remember, for Christians, Jesus in the first century was the chosen one that was prophesied from Jewish tradition. But the majority of Jews rejected that idea. And so this man, a military man, which the majority of Jews were expecting, comes in and he takes on Rome. And he does quite well, in the sense that he actually takes back some land. There's actually even coins minted with his name on it. And there's a lot of Jewish people who believe that he is the Mashiach in Hebrew, the anointed one. Well, Rome really gets upset with this and cracks down again and smashes Jewish resistance, and renames the area after what the Greeks have long called it, Syriana Philistina, or basically it's where we get the term Palestine is going to reemerge. Okay, now we're talking about over 2,000 years ago. Okay, in the meantime, a lot of Jewish history happened. And already at the time, there were large Jewish communities living in different parts of the world. And even though Judaism was centered around the ideas of those of the Holy Land, you have a global diaspora, okay, of dispersed Jewish people. But there was also conversions. This is talked about by the Israeli historian Shlomo Zand. So some Arab regimes in which is now Yemen converted to Judaism and actually had a Himyarite Jewish kingdom. There is a discussion of some Berber North Africans that also became Jewish, and there was also the Khazarian Empire, which there's a lot of mystery on, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories. I don't have time to go into it, but ultimately, my point is, the Jewish religion it's a small religion in terms of all the world religions, but it is a global one, and it has different sets of origins of, how those communities developed over the centuries, over 2,000 years. Ethiopia actually even has a Beta Israel, and there's debates if they were actually Ethiopians who kind of sort of evolved into their status, or they're actually, related all the way back to ancient Israel. So it goes on and on and on. So many. Okay, so we get to the 20th century. The majority of, or let's go to the 19th century. The majority of people living in the land are Arabs that are Christian and Muslim majority. Then there's Christians. We have another group called the Druze, D-R-U-Z, which are breakaway from Islam, and they're kind of they're not accepted by the majority of Muslims, and there's a small percentage of Jews, less than 10% at the beginning of the 19th century. By the early 20th century, Jews will still be only around 10%, more or less. And then you have Samaritans, like the Samaritan story, which are just several hundred, very small. So you have a very diverse and it is Jewish, Muslim, Christian. In some of the videos you're going to see go into that somewhat. Now, this is something that you're not going to hear often. The consensus view of rabbis at the time, and I'm not having a debate about what real Judaism is. I'm simply saying what the consensus view was, is that there was 3 oaths, and I have in the readings link, you can look it over, this idea that God gave 3 oaths, 2 for the Jewish people and 1 for the nations that they live under. And one of the first parts of the oath is that the Jewish people would not forcibly create a land in a country in the Holy Land. And the idea would be is that they would have to wait for the Mashiach, still waiting for the Messiah to come, before Jews would take political power back in Palestine. And this was a consensus view. Up until in the Ottoman Empire, many Jews lived in Turkey, which was a part of the Ottoman Empire. They lived in Iraq, and they lived in Egypt, and then even actually Egypt splits from the Ottoman Empire. But basically, so from the Ottoman Empire, many Jewish people lived all throughout the Ottoman Empire. And one of the smallest percentages of Jews lived in Palestine. This was not something that they were forced to do. In other words, the Ottoman Empire did not bar Jewish people in their domain to not go there. It was a self-imposed sort of rule. And I think also just Palestine was not that as developed as, economically and financially, like parts of the heart of the Ottoman Empire, which is now Turkey, or in Syria and Iraq. And so what you have is just the majority of Jewish people, they're always having a ritual saying next year in Jerusalem. But as Shlomo Avnery, one of the Israeli scholars who just passed away on the history of Zionism, points out, this was the idea of religious Zionism as it was understood was that it was sort of the same way that Christians wait for Jesus' second coming. It is not a political movement to go and forcibly take Palestine. That was the consensus. Now, that's what's going on in the land under the Islamic rulers, Ottoman Empire, and the Jewish populations that are living there and have been a part of that world, which are Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish people, if you want to study the different branches, they are choosing to live in most other places other than Palestine. Now, I had you watch a video earlier. We talked about Zionism under Herzl. It's going to be the non-religious, secular, European Jewish community with people like Herzl that are going to have an idea that under the nationalist concepts going on within Europe would apply just as much to the Jewish people. And if Germany is for Germans, and if Poland is for Poles, or Sweden is for Swedes, where would the Jewish community in Europe go? Zionism says, hey, the Holy Land, that's the place, anyways, that even the Christians in Europe agree is where we're rooted in. And that made sense in a nationalist context. And it was also during the time of colonization, where Europe colonized people in Africa and Asia, and they were having these imperial projects. And the earlier writers, as I pointed out, all identified themselves within that context of European colonialism. They said it. It's not something I'm making up, okay? And I can document that. Now, obviously, this is going to clash with the locals there. Okay. So I just want to put that part of the background there. The other videos are going to help clarify things a little bit more on what history comes after. I need you to read that article on Stalin and the Soviet Union and Czechoslovakia in terms of creating, helping facilitate the creation of Israel as well, because that's also something that's not really understood that much. Okay, so Israel gets created in 1948, and you're going to see the videos on that. And after the war for Palestine, Gaza is going to just simply be what's left of Palestine, and it's going to be under Egyptian occupation. The West Bank is another small section that's going to be under Jordanian occupation. The rest of what was Palestine is going to become Israel. There is an Israeli historian, Tom Segev, who wrote a book called 1949, The First Israelis. And what he's basically saying is this is, after 2,000 years, this is the first Israelis, like, right, okay? And it was done at the expense of the Palestinian population. That's well documented. Israeli historians like Ilan Pappé, Avi Schleim, Tom Segev, they have all the information out there and that has this very well documented, and more. There's more than just them. So that's how Israel is created, and then so we have Gaza there. 1967, there's another war with the Arabs that Israel is successful at, and they kick out the Egyptians, and they take over Gaza as an occupying force. West Bank and Jerusalem and East Jerusalem was under the Jordanians. They lost, and Israel wins that. So since 1967, the majority of Palestinians and the majority of in Gaza and West Bank have been under a military occupation by the Israelis. That is a very fundamentally important part to understand in this whole history and discussion. And during this time, there has been what are called settlers. Gaza has its own more complex relations to this, but in the West Bank, throughout the decades, Israel has been having Jewish people, many coming from the United States or Europe, taking land from Palestinians and claiming more land, more land, more land. There hasn't been a time that Israel has not been getting more land in some way from Palestinians. So what's left of a potential anything for Palestinians is very little. Now, the peace process, which we don't have time to really go into, is one which constantly the Palestinians are portrayed as resisting any kind of compromise, that they're the reason why that they never got their own state, because they're never satisfied. And it's always portrayed that they want to kick out all the Jewish people and drive them into the sea. I'm going to make an argument as a person who studied this quite extensively, read over 20 books on this, worked quite a bit with research and going to synagogue presentations and church presentations and like college presentations and all these kind of things, that this has been a propaganda method that Israel has successfully used against the Palestinian people. The Palestinians have never been offered a truly equal alternative. Let's just start with at the end of 1948. Let's talk about actually as occupied people. So I don't have time to go into the more complexities of the partition plan. That's also one that I would have debates about, but I don't want to overwhelm you with, there's already a lot of information. Ultimately, here's what I'd say. Israel at first was strictly fighting against Palestinian guerrillas who were fighting to get their land back. And then there was a peace process that started to happen between Palestinian leaders and Israelis. But Palestinians were never going to be allowed to have their own airspace controlled, like an air force to guard their own border security controlled. And And so without even going further, let's just put it that way. Okay, if you don't have the same rights as the state next to you, especially under the context we're talking about, as a nationalist leader of a Palestinian group, why would you accept taking a subset, a sort of pseudo-state that clearly advantages the people, the state that's created already on land that you and your ancestors in recent memory know was removed from you? It's never been a fair, equal opportunity package given to Palestinians. And as they reject these unrealistic expectations from a Palestinian perspective, what's happened is that Israel keeps getting advantage with more land and consolidating their position. And by the way, especially since the 1960s, the United States has been the #1 facilitator of this. And this is why I have to incorporate this into Western civilization. Actually, it was the Soviet Union and the United States also that helped facilitate getting Israel to win the war and to get the recognition as a state. And then it's the United States, with the help of Europe, but especially the United States, to allow for Israel to have the money to occupy the Palestinians and get the weapons and the superior advantage over them and their Arab and Iranian, Persian neighbors. So Iran is not Arab, by the way, and also Turkey. So basically, and Turkey and Israel have their own interesting relationship. All right, sorry. So what you have is the United States really being the #1 facilitator of keeping Israel superior in the region militarily, and the funding of suppressing Palestinian self-determination. There's no other way to put it. In 2006, there was an election that was supposed to be held in the West Bank and in Gaza for Palestinians to possibly further advance maybe having a state and practicing Western-style democracy. And so the United States really pushed Palestinians on this. The EU to a certain more hesitant position, but you'll see from Israel, okay, Palestinians need to practice, voting like the Western world, and democracy is great. Well, the Hamas, who you'll see a video on and cover, who Israel considered a terrorist organization at this point, and the United States, they were running, and the United States, EU, and Israel basically said, you can have fair and free elections, but you Palestinians are not allowed to vote for a party that we don't accept. Well, the majority of Palestinians, due to the fact of a lot of the corruption and the sellout position that the Palestinian Authority had been perceived to be in by the majority of Palestinians, voted for Hamas. And so here, have an election, have candidates of different parties run, but oh wait, you picked the wrong party, so now we don't accept this state. And this divided the Palestinians, and then there was a conflict between the Palestinians about this. Gaza went to Hamas. West Bank stayed under the semi-control of the Palestinian authorities, although the Israeli military is the main occupying force there that uses the Palestinian Authority to help them arrest people and keep things safe on behalf of Israel's interests. And then you had, you did have terrorism, as it would be called, because they're not state actors, so you can't call the state a war, I guess. If you have a militia group and you attack a country, that's terrorism. If you have a military and you attack, that's called active war. That's the language, right? So basically, because Hamas would send rockets and keep fighting against Israel, then Israel had a blockade on Gaza. And in the meantime, more settlers taking over more land in the West Bank. And then October 7th happens, which we're going to see in the documentary clip. Now, this gets us to where we're at now. We are in the worst circumstance I've ever seen in my lifetime, televised on TV, while Western nations and the United States facilitate a total genocide happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza as the Israeli reaction to what happened to the attack on Israel on October 7th. And there are still hostages, yes, with the Palestinian, with Hamas. But think about this. Israel articulated the fact that this terrorist attack that happened on October 7th is so bad because they attacked civilians that now, but Israel gets to justify an attack on their civilians by doing what they're doing now, which is starving the entire population, killing people indiscriminately, women and children and men who are not in Hamas. This is a completely televised genocide and a starving of the people and displacing them, and there is open discussion of ethnic cleansing, removing all the Palestinians by the Israelis and Trump. Now, Biden helped a lot of this, facilitates this problem as well. It is on par for what we saw in World War II, and we are on the wrong side of history. Now, this is why I'm being this biased, the way I'm articulating this. I can't imagine being a professor in World War II, seeing what the Nazis were doing to Jewish people, Roma people, handicapped, Jehovah's Witnesses, gays, their opposition, the concentration camps. If I had all this knowledge of what Germany was doing and say, oh, I'm not going to be biased, I want to be fair. The Germans, have been oppressed. The Treaty of Versailles really oppressed them as well. And, they have their own problems, blah, 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 blah. No. Okay, sometimes you just have to make a position on something. And I cannot, in good conscience, no, especially when it's my own government, with organizations here, like AIPAC, the Israeli lobby, and Christian groups that are actually think that this is tied to the end times, that are willing, and I'm not saying all Christians, there are certain groups that are pro-Israel, they call themselves Christian Zionists, are willing to expel every Palestinian, or maybe even kill or starve all of them before our very eyes, and we're all supposed to sit and do nothing. It's outrageous. And I just want to also say this. There are many Jewish human rights groups who are also against this. So remember, I'm not making a critique of Jewish people. I'm making a critique of Israel and the United States government. And I think it's one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen in my lifetime. And I have to put out that bias. So I'm not asking us to hate anybody. I'm asking my students here to look at the history, look at the context, and really see how false the history, see the way that we are shielded from actually understanding what the context is. And even if I was saying all the history that's wrong, you can look, even if you could put holes in any of the history that I'm teaching, you can still turn on the TV clip and see massive amount of starving people in Gaza. And there was no famine until Israel created the famine. You understand? There was no famine like this level. This is a created famine from over a year of a response to October 7th. It's so please open your hearts and minds. Be critical scholars. Challenge anything that I said. Please, all my students, I will take the time to go over every point that you want to draw out. I realize also my videos, there's their own biases. I'm not 100% comfortable with everything that every way, angle, there are certain wordings I would like to do or other things that could be added. But I needed to find video clips and some things to get you having enough understanding to at least engage productively with the topic. Okay, and you know, just to say, you know, look at a child, Jewish, Arab, Thai, Cambodian, European, you know, Swedish kid, a British kid. I mean, do we really think that one life is more important than another? No. So, again, I do have ideas about what a peace process would look like, but that's not, you know, my opinion, and no one's listening to, and that's not going to help us right now. I just want you to know I do want everybody to have peace, and what's happening right now is certainly there's none of that. This is, you know, so I'm going to end it here, and again, please engage with me if you know, you want anything further to be brought up or to go over.